Hey everybody, welcome. I'm here today with Eva Kurilova, a writer,
Hello.
Substacker, blogger. Yeah, I'm like absolutely loving Eva's work. Welcome, Eva.
Thank you so much for having me. It's
Yeah,
really nice to meet you.
yeah, you too. I'm so excited. Um, yeah, I've been watching and listening to and reading your stuff for a while now, and so I'm happy to welcome you here because like you're Canadian.
Yes.
And so lots of the stuff you write about has to do with what's going on here in Canada regarding the whole gender debacle and debate. And yeah. So will you lead the way with like how you got into this and what led you here?
Sure. It's kind of a convoluted story. I think that's why I wrote a piece about it, trying to get it straight in my head. What I will say is like, as like kind of a millennial lesbian, I did sort of just naturally get pushed into the direction of, trans rights and trans women are women. And it was just something that I had to accept to be like a good person. But I think kind of secretly, just below the surface, I was always thinking I don't know if I really do agree with all this stuff. Like, but everybody around me was thinking this way and talking this way, and so it was hard to like find my way out. And I think just over the years, I started seeing more and more stuff about like trans kids and about, men and women's sports. Not men and women's prisons, because nobody really knows about that until recently. But and that stuff just never really sat right with me. And so over the course of a few years, I came across just these examples of this stuff happening and not really buying into it. Like the trans kid thing was particularly big for me because as I've written in many places, I really do feel like if I was born later, I would be like a perfect candidate for a trans kid. So just from the very beginning, I was always like really hesitant about that idea. Because, I as a kid, like I would say I probably could have fit all the criteria for gender dysphoria. And I grew out of that. But the thing is, because I've been entrenched in this culture and in this thinking and then about like trans women are women, until I was in my late 20s, I kind of always thought, gee, should I have transitioned? Am I going to be, miserable later because I didn't transition because I have all these signs that I should have? And so thankfully, when I finally did come across people like criticizing this stuff and critiquing this stuff, which the first time I did was the gender critical subreddit, which I think hasn't existed for a few years, that was the first time I was really able to like drop that thought and realize how silly it was that I ever thought that maybe I should have transitioned, like it's some kind of cosmic objective truth instead of, a choice people make and follow. So yeah, I guess the real moment was kind of finding a group of people that didn't agree with this stuff. And it happened to be mostly other women. So I think that was pretty cool because I think I knew, oh yeah, well, those, right wing, like men, bigoted men are like, of course they don't agree with this, but most women go along with it, right? So it was really important to see that, which is why then I kind of slowly got into speaking out and speaking out publicly. Um, I guess to show people that, yeah, there's more people out there who think this way, and you don't have to be scared. I understand why people are for their jobs and stuff. Um, but I was in a unique position that I'm self-employed, I'm a writer. It still wasn't like there was still reason to fear
Mhm.
if, my clients find the stuff out. But I was like, well, if anybody can kind of have their name and face out there, it can be someone like me. So that's why I decided to start speaking out.
That's amazing, and I really appreciate that so much. Because yeah, it's so like important. We do need people speaking out, especially I think I mean, like obviously it has also there is a significant impact because you are part of the, LGB community, if you will. And Canada's preeminent lesbian. That's the sorry, I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna do it. That's the name you've been given, so that's wonderful.
That's my title. Amy Hamm, who we will talk about later, gave me that title.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. I love it. And I love that you use it in such a good way to like, just it's funny and it's also true. Yeah, yeah, that's thank you again, like because it's really it's a big conversation and yeah, there is a lot of reason to be scared.
Yeah.
Um, do you I appreciate that you didn't necessarily have a lot to lose, like necessarily employment wise or whatever, but did you experience a lot of like, have you experienced a lot of like online abuse, and how have you dealt with that?
Yeah, for sure. Just to the extent of, I think all of us who talk about this do, I'll get like I'm very active on X, formerly Twitter. And I mean, if I had my DMs open to anybody, which I don't, only people I follow, I would probably get so much stuff. I do think a lot of the more rabid, like trans rights activists have gotten tired of me. It's not that I've blocked them all, but definitely in the past, if I have a tweet that gets big, that criticizes this, yeah, I mean, if the wrong people find it, you can expect just horrific stuff. I
Mm.
mean, the other day I posted a screenshot where I had found out that somebody was trying to message me on Facebook with just really gross, just like comments like, you owe us your rights or whatever, and like even worse stuff, and just little things like that. But um, I don't really. I guess it used to impact me when I first started because it can be pretty bad.
Mhm.
But if you ignore them, I find they kind of go away. And really, at the end of the day, like I've learned to just, if you see a comment like that, it doesn't bother me anymore.
Yeah.
Um, so I know that it can be worse. I know some women get, doxxed or even just more threatening messages. Or
Mhm.
thankfully, I've never dealt with anything that has concerned me too much.
Right.
Just the odd troll here and there. And honestly, it's been fantastic for my mental health, to be honest, because I've had to learn to just not really care and to just get over it. And it's been okay. Yeah. So for the most part, though, my experience has been very, very positive.
Awesome. Yeah, that's a like a really big part of it, I think, is just that learning to let it go, learning to like literally just let it roll off.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's well,
I will say, like, I do see some people who actively engage with these trolls and stuff. They just keep coming back.
yeah.
I mean, not to tell them how to manage their social media, but then they know they've got somebody who's going to give them attention, and so they don't leave them alone. There are lots of rabid trans rights activists on Twitter. There still are. They just kind of got tired of me, I suppose.
I like how I have so much like reverence for people who can do that, who can like engage and like keep engaging and engaging with like the abuse. I think, I mean, again, like I know there's a time and a place to like just completely disengage and stop doing that. I'm like, wow, that is a level of resilience that I just do not have yet. And like maybe I never will have. And yeah,
I like to use it as like a teachable moment. Like yesterday, some guy was coming at me trying to tell me that like the conservatives in my province and the premier, that they hate me and they hate my existence and they don't want me to exist. So it's not that that impacted me, but I was just kind of quote tweeting him and showing like this is what happens if you're someone like me and you're stepping out of line, supporting the wrong politics. You're gonna get the people who claim to be your allies telling you these people hate you and they want you dead, basically.
these are like progressive leftist or like, liberal
Yeah.
or NDP supporters or something
Yeah.
saying
Yeah.
that the conservatives hate you and want, to take your
Yeah.
rights away. And
Yeah, I get that all the time. That's kind of the main things that I deal with right now in terms of like trolls and stuff. Yeah.
right. Which, yeah, is really like fascinating because, as so much of the time is the case, we deal with like people who are literally, you're like, it's the irony is so brutally cruel that like the people who are actually claiming to support the rights of marginalized people are actually actively harming people. It's
Yeah.
like a really weird time that we're in, but they don't see it that way, and it's
No,
interesting. Yeah,
no, they don't.
yeah.
Yeah.
Can would you yeah, so recently you've written about actually I wanted to jump on that because you met with Danielle Smith recently
Yeah.
and you wrote about it. And so for anyone who doesn't know, Danielle Smith is the premier of Alberta,
Yes.
and you met with her and it was actually like a really good experience.
It was, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm laughing because it's been almost 2 weeks and I still can't believe it. It was like it happened so fast and it was so crazy. And like aside from this issue, like I do like her. She's a personal hero of mine.
Mm,
I think her political story is amazing.
mm,
Like just a brief, she went from being basically like almost premier in 2012 to like the most hated woman in the province because of just some political maneuvering she did to premier. So I just thought that was amazing. And yeah, so we were lucky enough, November 16th, I think it was a Thursday, to meet with her. It was me and my friend Lois, who is a transsexual and First Nations, and my friend James, who is a gay man, and he started a Northern Light Alliance, which is kind of like the Canadian version of Gays Against Groomers, a little bit more like tempered. So yeah, the Monday of that week, we found out that some kind of people working behind the scenes wanted us to meet with her. Like, this was not anything that we did or asked for, or, you know, I think all of my friends who would listen will tell you that I've probably told them that sometime within the next 5 years or so, I would meet Danielle Smith, just because I said that, you know, I'll meet her one day. So when I heard that Monday, I was like, what? So yeah, we got to sit down with her. We had a little like half-hour time slot. We went well over. We went about 45 minutes, and there was people waiting after us, so we felt bad, but it was great she gave us the time. And we just basically, we didn't know going into it, are they going to have topics for us? Do they want something from us? You know, what's going on? But we basically got to control the conversation. It sort of started with like Lois's story, because Lois sort of not so much regrets transitioning, but has a lot of like complications and you know, a lot of medical issues resulting from that. So we kind of started talking about that. From there, we were able to jump in. I was able to kind of do a brief overview of my story thing, you know, saying that I was a very gender nonconforming young girl, a tomboy, but I just grew up to be a lesbian. And so Danielle Smith was also there with Rob Anderson. He's the executive director of the Premier's office. So it was good to have him there too. And they were just great. They listened. They clearly, I think, were quite aware of this issue. I don't think we were the first people to talk to them about it. There was some things that I was glad to be able to kind of fill them in on and clarify, and they had some great questions. You know, they're aware of kind of issues in therapy where therapists are scared to maybe take like an explorative approach with a child who thinks they might be trans, because in Canada we have Bill C4. I think C4 is what it eventually passed under, right?
You know what? I thought it was C6. The amendment was to Bill C6, right?
Yeah.
I don't
And
know.
anyway, it's the anti-conversion therapy law. It's a federal law. It makes it a criminal offense to, you know, do conversion therapy, which they describe as efforts to change sexual orientation and gender identity. It's just very confused. There never has been like a it's just a very confused law, and it makes therapists, I think, scared to do anything but affirm a child or anyone who says that they're trans.
Because it includes talk therapy too, right? Like you can't,
Yeah.
like, even just exploring.
Yeah.
There's no watch and wait. There's no, it's just like affirm or get in trouble, basically.
Yeah. Yeah. And as far as I know, I could be wrong, I don't think any therapists have gotten in trouble under this law for this. And there are therapists in Canada that do exploratory therapy. But I do think, like, I think that is a very stifling environment. Like, I do know some therapists who are scared for their licenses because they will not automatically affirm somebody who says they're trans. So it's kind of nice to hear that the Premier was aware of that issue. It's a tricky issue because that's a federal bill. And just in general, knowing that a lot of these kids, you know, would grow up to be gay or are autistic kids, or, you know. And I also appreciated that she had concerns for adults. You know, she said to Lois, you transitioned when you were 19 and you weren't necessarily ready. You were a legal adult, but, you know, so we need kind of guardrails to help people with that. Yeah, I just felt like it was good. And so less than a week after our meeting, she didn't tell us any specifics about when they're going to introduce legislation or what kind. We were just kind of having a discussion. But less than a week after, the Minister of Education announced in the legislature that they are, you know, having discussions and considering legislation similar to what like Saskatchewan and New Brunswick have now, which basically is a very basic, just like that schools cannot keep, you know, pronoun and name changes from parents. Basically, that schools can't socially transition kids without parental consent. And so, in my opinion, I mean, this is the smallest first step that you can take, really. It's such a small thing, but it's important. So I haven't heard any more on that. I know that there's lots else going on in Alberta right now, but I have hope. Like, it was just very nice to see that she understood and had good questions and really listened to us. Like, it was a really good meeting.
Now there's going to be people like, first, that's amazing. That's really great. That's really cool that, like, it almost like so serendipitous that she
It was
crazy. It's
yeah.
crazy. It's kind
especially yeah, what happened behind the scenes with the people who kind of helped set it up. They happened to just meet in downtown Calgary. They knew each other, but they went to the same event, got to talking, said, okay, let's do this. And
awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. That interesting. And there's going to be people who there might not, because the people who are watching this might just agree. But there might be people, and I know that I've spoken to people who would say like, this is regressive. Like something like this would be looked at as like, oh my God, our rights are being taken away. This is regressive. Children should, under the auspice of like affirming care and sort of secrecy in schools, is protecting trans kids.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the sort of ideology, is that these are all in place to protect trans kids. How would you sort of respond to that? I guess, like, yeah.
I would respond that there's no such thing as a trans kid. First of all, there are boys and girls, and they have, so many different personalities, and it doesn't make them any less of a boy or a girl. There are kids with gender dysphoria. Sure, I could easily have been classified as one of them. And I mean, the idea that the way to deal with those kids is to give schools the power to socially transition them, which is not benign. It is a psychotherapeutic intervention. It completely changes how the child sees themselves, how other kids see them. So the idea that that's the right way to deal with that is silly. We know we don't deal with children that way. We have all these laws that don't let you drink or get a tattoo or whatever until a certain age. So I think I would answer it that way. And I would say, it's not that a kid maybe goes to a school counselor and starts kind of talking about, oh, I have these feelings and I think maybe I'm trans or this. I don't feel like the counselor automatically has to tell the parents and the kids can have no privacy. But if the kid is like, well, now I want, a different name, I want different pronouns in the classroom. Yeah, that's absolutely a conversation that, should be had with the parents. And also if the child is just struggling in general, I mean, I think obviously there's a discussion to have about balancing. If a kid doesn't want to tell their parents and just talk to a counselor, that's totally okay. But it's about these interventions. It's about actively changing children's names and pronouns. Some schools even, I don't know how common it is in Canada, but some schools have even like a transition closet where kids can like change for the day and wear the opposite sex clothes or things like that. And that's just really overstepping. And so the idea that like schools and not parents should be sort of the primary caregivers is getting into pretty dystopian territory, I think, because at the end of the day, if they do this to a child, they set them down the path of transition, social transition. Maybe the kid ends up, because of that, on puberty blockers, hormones, surgeries, all this. 5-10 years down the line, severely regrets this. None of those school staff, teachers, administration will have to deal with that. That kid is gone, long gone. They can wash their hands of them. It's the family, it's the parents that are going to have to deal with that and support that child. So that's just kind of my thinking about that issue.
Yeah. And to add to that, we do know that if it often doesn't stop at affirming, and in Canada, we know there is no age of consent for receiving medical care. So as long as your healthcare provider agrees with you, no matter what age you are, you absolutely can. And kids do get put on hormones and puberty blockers. It happens where I live. I'm sure it happens where you live. It happens all over the place. I mean, I've read Lois's story, by the way, and Lois, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but lives up north, right? In
about 2 hours northeast of Edmonton.
oh, okay.
Yeah,
So not up north, but yeah.
Not too far, yeah.
Right. Yeah, so it's happening sort of all over the country. And
it is, yeah.
Yeah, and actually Lois's story is quite heartfelt and very, your heart really goes out to her. And
yeah, I mean, that's the whole reason we were able to see the premiere. Really, it had nothing it was to do with Lois. Like, Lois was in contact with a lawyer, and they just happened to set this up. They had seen me in like a Benjamin Boyce video, like they saw us together, so that's how they were aware of me. But it was really because of Lois that this whole thing happened, so that's why, at first we just kind of let Lois talk and all that, and then we got into some other issues.
Yeah,
but yeah, credit where it's due. Like, that's the whole reason this happened.
Yeah, well, good for her. Yeah, and like your writing contributions on your Substack, as I've said, like I try to follow pretty closely. But you've recently released one that was a GenSpect. Is GenSpect a Canadian? Are they a Canadian organization?
No. In fact, I mean, the founder is Stella O'Malley, who's in the
right. Yeah.
I don't want to get this wrong. In the UK.
Yeah. And so recently, though, they've released a document, and you wrote a piece on it, supporting gender questioning students in Canadian schools. So
yes.
I would recommend. Yes.
right
I
there.
would recommend and everyone go and read that. Even just the article, if not the document itself. Lots of questions answered, lots of data, facts on what's actually happening, rather than just assumptions and kind of like hearsay, because I get a lot of people saying to me, along the lines of the points you've raised already, child transing, sports, prisons. I get a lot of people who say to me, like, but is that really happening? Like they think, well, maybe that happened once, but is that like really like happening? And
It is,
yeah, it absolutely is. And we're seeing it more and more and more. I mean, you mentioned, I want to go back to the child transing, but you mentioned prisons, and like, I mean, Heather Mason is doing tons of advocacy around that, just trying to open up the discussion and spread awareness that, like, yeah, so men, violent men, rapists, murderers, child rapists, child sexual abuse predators are being housed with women and
they are.
assaulting and harassing women in prisons as we speak right now, under, again, an amendment. I wouldn't even want to say an amendment. It's part of Bill C-16. And
Yes, it was because of Bill C-16 that Correctional Service Canada got their like policies in line with that bill.
yeah,
Yeah.
anyone who says they're, and I mean, the way they word it is anyone aligning with your gender identity. But I mean, how many trans women are, fighting to get into men's prisons? I mean,
You mean like trans men, like women who say they're trans?
yeah,
Yeah, honestly, like as Heather often says, that they do sometimes request it, but they're basically always denied due to overriding health and safety concerns. Yeah, the Correctional Service Canada won't let women go into men's prisons, even if they say they're men. But it seems like very often, even though they could say there are overriding health and safety concerns, they let the most depraved men into women's prisons with mother-child programs, which
well,
means that like those women have kids up to age of 4 with them,
yeah.
and they're moving pedophiles to these prisons,
And
male
it's
pedophiles.
yeah, and it's not like even that they're specifically moving the most depraved men, like they're selecting the most depraved men. It's that the most depraved men seem to be the ones that are demanding
Yes,
to go into the
exactly.
presence, right? So
That's actually absolutely true. I mean, even just by Correctional Service Canada's own statistics, which line up with other, statistics we have from the UK and the US, the men in prison who say they are trans, roughly half of them are in there for sex offenses. That's actually, I think, some like more than double just the general male prison population. So like they're painted as these very, very vulnerable people because people have this idea that it's kind of the effeminate homosexual transsexuals had surgery, which I would agree such a person can be vulnerable, but that's not really the cohort that is like requesting transfer to these women's prisons.
yeah.
And so, yeah, they actually do tend to be more dangerous. They also tend to be in there for more violent crimes. They have their victims tend to be women and children. Like these are stats that I was surprised that the government actually released.
And people don't know this. People have
No,
no idea. Nobody's talking about this. The CBC
no,
article that discussed this, the was the CSC policy, was they talked about it being overjoyed that this is now happening, overjoyed.
yes,
And it's
yes,
like we're talking about the most vulnerable women in society,
we are.
while the politicians, the news anchors, and the like activists are overjoyed that there's now violent men that are entering women's prisons.
I know.
And it's like interesting too, because you mentioned, yeah, there like trans identifying men who could be vulnerable. Absolutely. I would argue that a good percentage of the people who are identifying as trans to get into women's prisons are probably not trans in the first, or like don't even believe they're trans at all.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, like Heather Mason, she gave a speech last week at the Rebel News Live conference, and she knows more than anyone. She knows all this, and absolutely, there are many men that will gloat about the fact that, oh, I'm not actually trans. I don't actually think I'm a woman. She happens to work with like the stepson of somebody who's currently in jail, and he has told her, yeah, my stepdad does not actually think he's a woman. He's just trying to serve his time in a female prison. So like, yeah, it's weird. And for the, people don't know, like even after her speech at the Rebel News conference, where you've got, right wingers, mostly people who don't support this, people came up to her and were like, I didn't know any of this, or maybe I didn't know these more depraved details of this. And so I was shocked that even there people were like, this is news to me. It's been happening since 2017.
Yeah. That's
Right.
Bill C-16 was enacted, right?
Yeah.
2017.
And shortly after, in the same month, in January, I believe, they updated the prison policy.
Yeah.
Yeah, like right away.
Yeah. I mean, and just to kind of drive it home, like, I mean, we're talking like child and baby rapists in prison with women. It's horrific.
Yes.
It's absolutely horrific.
I can think of two off the top of my head. Like that's what they are.
Yeah, it's
And
absolutely.
and sometimes people will say, well, if they've had the surgery, they can go. But like one of these men that I'm thinking of, he has had the surgery. So yeah, maybe he's physically a tiny bit less threatening, but he's still harassing women on the inside, especially women who look younger or have kind of like cognitive disabilities. He's targeting those women.
Yeah.
So just because he's had the surgery,
Yeah.
like it used to be prior to self-ID, there was a policy of like, okay, you have to have had the surgery, you have to kind of have gone through all the like the real life tests and all this. Like I still don't agree with it, but Canada has been doing these transfers since the 80s, and they were so few and far between that it really wasn't causing much trouble. Again, ideal world, I don't agree with it. I just think if it stayed that way, we wouldn't be like protesting. We might be raising concerns with MPs or whatever, but there wouldn't be protests about what's going on. But the change in policy combined with the massive just trend in society of just self-ID and trans everything has led to a situation that's just abhorrent and like untenable. So
I want to go back for a second to the child transing issue and kind of what got you sort of largely what kind of drove you down this road. Because it was like there was like a really personal bit about it for you with the like growing up to be gay bit. Because we've seen some of the data that's reflected is that the watch and wait method or practice, just to like sort of not give kids drugs or don't suppress their physical development, often like the majority of the time, if not the vast majority of the time, they actually they desist. So they don't their gender dysphoria desists.
yeah.
And there's a good percentage of these kids that turn out to be gay.
Yeah. There is a lot of data about that from kind of before we took this affirmation turn. To be fair, I think it's mostly about young boys, but I don't see why it wouldn't like be for young girls as well. That if you took the watchful waiting approach and you just let kids kind of go through puberty, almost 90% of them would desist and would be okay with their sex. And yeah, I think like the majority of them did turn out to just be gay. Everybody knows that, young kids who are going to grow up to be gay are generally quite gender nonconforming. It's not always true. There's many girls who are tomboys who grow up to be straight. But just in general, if if a kid grows up and comes out as gay and people will say, oh, we always knew, it's probably because they were pretty gender nonconforming, like I was. I was a huge tomboy. I played with the boys. I liked boy toys. I wore boy clothes. I just would have hit like every criteria. And even as I started to go through puberty, which is uncomfortable for all girls, of course, I just had, it felt strange. It felt like I was developing in like a wrong way. I think even sort of beyond just like, oh, damn, I'm developing. So I've gone through, like I've written an article where I've gone through all the criteria that's in the DSM that people say we should kind of go back to instead of gender affirmation. And I still feel like it's very flimsy. Like I still would have hit all of them and I still grew up and just was a lesbian, right? And aside from just proto-gay kids, I mean, some kids just don't fit norms, especially autistic kids. They might feel like I don't really, get a fit with other boys or other girls, and that must mean I'm different and I'm actually the other sex. Even just kids with mental health issues might see it as that's my solution for feeling better. And even just the most kind of the really sad thing is kids who have been sexually abused sometimes might feel like, well, if I wasn't a little boy or a little girl, if I could change sex, then maybe I wouldn't have been abused or I won't be abused in the future. That does happen. Like the CAS review in the UK of their gender clinic there did mention that some of these kids clearly or possibly were like sexual abuse victims, and that's what was driving the trans identification. So if you just call a child trans, you're potentially obscuring like so many different reasons why they might be uncomfortable. And so that's just such an abdication of adult responsibility to do something like that.
Professional responsibility, adult responsibility, absolutely.
Yeah.
And just to like emphasize everything you're saying, you know, like this is one of my biggest concerns, is that oftentimes, like most often, these are vulnerable kids. These are kids
Yeah.
with psychological comorbidity, lots of mental health, very prevalent depression, anxiety,
Yeah.
neurodivergent kids, kids who have had sexual trauma in their past, kids who are experiencing intense discomfort when going into puberty because they're gay,
Yeah.
not fitting in,
Yeah.
all that stuff. Like, it is the most vulnerable kids who it is the most attractive to say, oh, you can be a new person. You
Yeah.
don't, right? You don't have to be you anymore. You can have a new name and be a new person. I think it's really worth, I don't know, which is why it blows my mind that people aren't more careful about this, because it really just screams like, whoa, let's slow down. Like, giving kids drugs that's gonna irrevocably change their body forever is not the right thing to do. And even the, like, I'm constantly thinking about the effects of arresting puberty on the brain, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then developing into an adult, it's actually quite, yeah, it's weird to even say developing into an adult, because developing into an adult is going through puberty. So
Yeah.
it's really concerning. And which is why, again, just to, I'm really reiterating this, but which is why I appreciate your offering so much, because you're going into this all the time, and these are such important conversations to have. And I think within the greater sort of the more mainstream conversation is just, it's just telling us to like ignore all these things. It's like,
Oh
don't
yeah.
talk about them, just ignore them. We shouldn't. And if you try to talk about them, you're a phobe or you're a bigot. Like, it's insane how, even in my like mild, like I've talked about this stuff online, but I'm not talking about it every day. I'm not posting stuff every day about it, but I do try to like post fairly consistently, and I want to engage with people, but I get called a transphobe. Yeah. So I mean, and
Yeah.
it always gets like, it always gets paired with like racism and homophobia. So like,
For me too.
yeah. So
I'm a
you're
homophobe as well.
right. You've got internalized homophobia
Yeah.
happening.
Yeah, I do. And I
Yeah.
just want to say like one more thing about kind of the vulnerable kids issue. I mean, in Canada, we give so much lip service to the First Nations people, Indigenous people. We do land acknowledgements all the time. And the one kind of striking statistic that I wish everybody would know is that at Canada's gender clinics, Indigenous kids make up about 18% of kids at gender clinics, like seeking transition. Like this is from a study run by people who believe in this. So it's not like these are numbers that like I'm making up. Trans youth you can look it up. So 18% roughly. Indigenous kids make up, I think, like 7% of the Canadian population. So they are over double represented at these clinics. We know that they are generally quite vulnerable. So to not pause and think like what's going on, and like we're sterilizing a great big subset of these children, given Canada's history of sterilizing Indigenous women, is so insane that like I don't know. I just think when people see those numbers, I don't know how the people who ran the study could then break down the stats of the numbers and think this is fine.
Yeah.
Like this is just fine. And especially also the girls are vastly overrepresented. In Canada, they make up about 80% of kids seeking to transition. Like somebody has to answer why young girls just happen so often to be born in the wrong body. Why is it such a mismatch? Like if this is, or why the brain just develops in a wrong way and you end up with a trans kid. Like to not be curious, even if you fully believe that this is just the great way to go, you should affirm, you should trans children, to not be curious about these discrepancies in like rates of transition is just so strange to me from just every level, scientific, social, moral. Like it doesn't make any sense.
No, you nailed it. And I don't have the stats like in off the top of my head, but I mean, yeah, exactly. Like, why is there a 5,000 to 20,000% uptick in like prepubescent females identifying out of their sexed body? Like,
Yeah.
what's happening there? And exactly, you've got these intelligent people who are like really advocating for all of this affirmation crap, and it's like, but not asking these questions. It's like, no, this is just, it's just you know, just gender, like, I don't know, to me it's just like this gender la la land sort of thing, like
Yeah.
But I wanted to mention, I know Cherry Smiley talks a bit about this kind of stuff with indigenous issues kind of being in direct conflict with trans ideology. But also there's a woman named Michelle, and I'm gonna really mess up her name. It's Uraihu, or I think, and she, I believe, is a Maori activist.
Oh,
And
okay.
she actually, Isabella Malvin interviewed her a while back. She's very active on social media, and she talks a lot about actually the colonization of gender ideology on Indigenous women and youth, especially in her community and out in New Zealand where she is.
Mm.
Yeah, and how basically they're sterilizing Indigenous kids with this ideology,
Yeah.
literally,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, so it is a big deal. Nobody's talking about it.
No.
And again, right, it's like the very people who, I mean, and it's embedded at this point. Like the 2S is embedded in the in Canada in the LGBT QIA plus.
It is, yeah. And like that same study I talked about, I think it said something roughly about 70% of kids upon their first visit to a gender clinic were given puberty blockers. And everyone says, "Oh, it's just a pause button." Like you mentioned, how can you put a pause on puberty? First of all, you miss those milestones, you miss them. But 99% of the time it leads to hormones.
Yeah.
It's not a pause button, it's just a first step. Well, it's a second step. The first step would be the social affirmation, which
It's
everybody
not
pretends
a,
is not a big
yeah,
deal.
it's not, this is what people think. It's not a pause button. Actually, I've been in university courses where this is discussed, and it's very much widely propagated that it is just a pause. It's not a pause. You can't
No,
give people Lupron. You can't give children Lupron and call it a pause.
no,
You can't pause puberty. There are many, 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 many side effects like that nobody's talking about, bone density
no,
issues, cancers, like there are so many issues, internal, and like issues with internal organs, especially sex organs, like irreversible damage.
absolutely. Yeah.
And then lots of the information now that's kind of widely available now, and I think it's discussed in your article as well as in the document, the Gen Spec document supporting gender questioning students in Canadian schools, is that there are so many widely available, like there's so much widely available data now that kids going into puberty blockers, the rates at which then they go for cross-sex hormones, and then if depending on their age, their sex, like their ability to like even have sexual feeling is gone. Like, so they're,
Yeah.
and nobody's actually, this is another thing that nobody's educated about. Kids aren't educated about this. Kids aren't told that
No.
you might actually be giving up your ability to, and I don't want to get into too much about like kid sexuality or anything like that, but they're not, nobody's talking about it. Nobody's talking to the kids about this. They're
No.
not being educated. The parents aren't being educated, if they even know about it. Like, yeah, it's highly, highly, highly concerning. And just what's the secondary thing for me after the fact that it's actually happening to kids is the fact that nobody knows the facts, right?
Mm. No, they just know talking points. They just know like the nice platitudes and stuff that make it all sound really good and like a great thing to do. I mean, yeah. So Marcy Bauer, the current trans identified man, the current president of WPATH, the World Professional Association for Transgender Health, has surprisingly, at least to his credit, said that if you block a child at Tanner stage 2, which is like a stage of puberty, which is when generally they give puberty blockers, if you do that, then you proceed to cross-sex hormones, then you proceed to surgeries and stuff. I think Marcy was mostly talking about boys here, I'm not sure, but virtually 100% chance the child is never going to have an orgasm. is never going to actually sexually mature. And yeah, people say, well, you're talking about kids' sexuality, you're so creepy. We're talking about them growing up and having the ability to form a romantic relationship.
We're talking about
That,
adults. We're talking about
yeah,
in their adult state. Once they
yeah,
become sexually mature, there's no chance for
like you sterilize them, they can't have children, but even just aside from that, they're going to have a very hard time forming a relationship with another adult. Like that's no joke.
no.
And so I mean, I think I wrote a piece about this once where I feel like people who push this stuff, like, okay, some people just don't know that this happens, fine. But people who push this stuff, knowing that this will happen to children, like the people who did like the initial Dutch studies that this is all based on, it's like they've just given up on these children. They've said, these kids are so gender nonconforming, they're so weird, they're so strange that blocking their puberty and stealing their future fertility and sexual function, well, it's not stealing much because they probably wouldn't have amounted to anything anyway. They probably wouldn't have had relationships anyway and kids and families, right? It's kind of like you've just given up. When if you just let these kids be, they could have very well grown up to have all of that in their life. And so that's where I get freaked out for myself too, because this would happen to me, and I would like to have a baby. I've been trying. we're trying, and I wouldn't have that option if I was born like 10 years later and would have been identified by some teacher or counselor or somebody as a trans boy and put through all of this. And so looking at young girls like me, which so many girls who are being transitioned very young, it's kind of different for maybe the teenage cohort, but the kind of young girls who are just tomboys who likely would just be lesbians, they're being identified as trans boys and they're being set down this path. And so, like, I care about all the children this is impacting, but just because I know what it was like to be that girl and what it was like to grow up, it's particularly just poignant to me to know that what's happening to these girls, because I know how they could grow up. They could just grow up to be like me, you know? So
it's really, really, really concerning. Yeah, I want to, like, you know, it's really, I guess Canada's like kind of in the middle, because yeah, as you stated, like the sort of Nordic countries, lots of the Nordic countries and European countries went through this maybe a decade ago.
Almost, yeah. Starting in like 2015.
Right. Okay. And kind of were like ahead of the game on all of this stuff, but are now sort of rolling back some of their legislation and some of their practices and policies around all of this because they've seen the outcomes and they have the data now, right? Yeah, and I guess Canada just seems to be going just full steam ahead with all of it, kind of not I mean, for me, the politics side of things, I know that politicians are doing things to try to get votes. Like I don't believe for a second they're doing it because they care, they give a shit about trans kids or anything like that, or, you know, trans identified people. But yeah, I guess I just like question, and I don't know if you have the answer to this, and you may also have this question, but like, why is Canada, do you think, just like so blindly accepting of all of this? Like, why do you think Canadians are, I don't know, like, I feel like the States is a little bit more, I mean, I guess depending on what state, but other countries seem a bit more critical.
Well, I think, you know, the fact that you bring up the States is relevant because I think we have this national identity based on being not the States. So I think the more, and being nice and progressive and liberal and ahead of the curve and not backwards, and I think there's just this feeling, especially of like not being like the regressive Republican red states. And so now I think as you see more states rolling this stuff back and looking at it, and it is generally Republican states, I think, I don't know if exclusively. So I think a lot of Canadian progressives are digging their heels in and being like, well, no, we have to be progressive Canada, right? And sure, we've got conservatives, but especially at the federal level, like they're not socially conservative, which is, I'm not super socially conservative either, but like, for example, Bill C4, that anti-conversion therapy bill, passed unanimously, every single conservative member of parliament, right? So there just isn't a significant, I just think people are very, very scared of being labeled bigoted, alt-right, conservative. Like those are just bad things to be in Canada. I'm sure there are other reasons why this is happening, but those are just bad things to be. Like, you know, my neighbor during our last provincial election, like great people, I loved all my neighbors, but I had a sign for the UCP candidate, the conservative candidate, and they had NDP, and that's totally fine with me. But I overheard him telling his daughter, we have to go vote so that the fascists don't get in, right? Just mild conservatives, of which our provincial party is not even that socially conservative at all,
No.
are being called fascists. That's the level of like rhetoric that we're at. So if you express like just mild views that are right now on like the right of the political spectrum, you are a fascist to just everyday people. So there's a great fear. Like, you know, people are constantly saying what a homophobe Danielle Smith is. And there's no reason why they're saying that. She's just a conservative. And so she must be a homophobe.
Mm-hmm. She
So
must
I just,
hate gay people because she's conservative.
yeah. And so I don't know, there's just this kind of fear of being labeled these things, of being labeled hateful. And
it's so ridiculous too, because I mean, it's just the opposite of reality in many ways for me, because you know, as I've watched, like I really enjoyed I Danielle Smith for me kind of my eyebrows raised when she kind of, you know, I said anything to contradict the sort of COVID narrative, right? Or the COVID policies, or, you know, I think at one point she even said, look, like, I'm sorry for what we did to people. Like, I think she actually went as far as to, you know,
she did, yeah.
which is not like, it's not really, you know, it's not anything in itself, but it's way more than anyone else has done. Like,
That's true.
and
yeah.
so I was like, you know, this person, maybe there's something to this. But the irony of it is that a lot of what's coming out of, I guess, for lack of a better term, the progressive sort of, again, like we have all of our parties are so centrist in Canada that it's hard to say like left or right or anything. But a lot of the liberal sort of rhetoric is so much closer to actual fascism than like all of this. Like, don't question, like if you question anything, you're a fascist. If you, you know,
yeah.
having these conversations makes us bigoted, racist, homophobes. Like,
yeah.
Yeah, like that's shutting down people's ability to think and criticize and have discussions is actually so much closer to fascism than, you know, trying to protect kids. I'm not saying that's the only
It is, yeah.
Yeah, I'm not saying that's the only agenda, and I'm not saying that, like, you know, no, like I know conservatives who just don't agree with, you know, don't agree with being gay, and
oh yes, for sure, they exist, yeah.
but like, yeah, I don't know, I think, yeah,
but just today's just average small c conservative doesn't have a problem.
no,
they don't like the, yes, there are absolutely radicals, and there are actually more people on the left that give me trouble if I was to say, well, I'm homosexual, and that doesn't include trans women.
mm-hmm.
The level of hatred I would get for that would be ridiculous, right? So yeah, in terms of homophobia, I just don't think it's like a huge problem in just kind of the mainstream right. Of course there are. I've experienced it. I've seen it myself in person. People on Twitter, right wingers who don't like that I'm lesbian. I see that it's there.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, speaking about politics, like I just never really was interested in going any kind of political route. I really always thought my role, like in writing, was to sort of change the culture and the conversation, because I really do believe like politics is downstream of culture. But I do see the benefit of introducing policies that actually put rules in place. Yeah. You know, I do. Like Linda Blade, my friend here up in Edmonton, she's wonderful. She's a coach. She used to be the president of Athletics Alberta. You know, she went, and for the National Conservative Party, she put forth a policy about, like, you know, women's sex segregated spaces and things like that. Mm-hmm. And that at least starts the conversation at a political level. Like, I do see the importance of doing that. Mm-hmm. And especially just being able to talk to the premier and get a sense of where they're at, and maybe move the needle and convince people in power to protect kids in schools, to not keep secrets from parents. Like that's going to have real effects. So I still have no interest in politics really personally myself, but I do see the merits in engaging politicians now, because like we do have to fight back at like a legislative level, yeah, with this stuff. So
kids, girls, women in prisons, vulnerable women. Yeah, absolutely. Speaking of, you know, sort of political engagement and stuff, that you attended the Million Parent March. I'm curious about, because I got a lot of pushback about like how, yeah, it's just like right-wing, anti-trans, the whole message across the board was just that this was an anti-trans, hateful movement. I supported it because I'm a parent, and I am am not in favor of, as you mentioned earlier, like the state or the schools having rights, legal rights that parents don't have. I think it's really, I was very reticent to send my kids to public school in the first place, but I did. And yeah, so that was a big thing for me. It's like, we should be having transparent conversations with each other. Parents and teachers should be in constant contact. If there's issues going on with kids, to be able to better support kids. And I recognize that not all parents are going to, yeah, I mean, as you've said before, like, we're not always going to agree. Like, we're not ever going to agree on everything, right? But I thought it was a good political opportunity to show sort of how people felt on sort of a large scale, at least to a certain extent. What did you think about being there? I wasn't at the march, but what was your experience?
Yeah, so I went to the one in Calgary on September 20th or 21st, something like that. And it was a great, like, huge crowd. Like, I think estimates on CTV and stuff said 1,000, but there's no way. There was at least 2,000 people there. Like, it was a really, really big crowd. Very just like diverse, very multicultural. I felt totally fine being there. Yeah, there was, I would say there was more like radical, like right-wing elements, but there wasn't the overall messaging was leave the kids alone, parents' rights. I don't recall any speeches or signs that specifically were like targeting trans people or gay people. There was one controversy that came out of Calgary. Must have happened after we left. There was like an open mic and the little kids were coming up to it. And one little kid, like a Muslim little kid, came up and starts yelling about gays are disgusting and all this. But when that was posted to Twitter, it was clipped there. But eventually, we got the full clip. And like the main organizer, his name is Mamoun Mora, he instantly jumped in and was like, we don't say that. They are our brothers and sisters. Like, this is not why we're here. And so I'm not surprised that at a rally that did have a very significant Muslim community, there was a kid who has heard this stuff at home. Like, it's not great. But then, you've got people on the other side believing gender nonconforming kids should be sterilized. So it's not like that's going to throw me over to the other side of the street. Yeah. But anyway, yeah, he instantly was just like, no, we don't talk that way. And in general, like, I was there with a friend who actually had like a sign, and he had used like rainbow tape around the edges just to make it fancy. And so one guy kind of at one point comes up to him and he was a bit confused. He's like, are you with them, like the other side? And my friend was like, no, I'm here with you guys. He's like, okay. He's like, okay, we don't have a problem with those people. We're here for the kids. We're here for the kids. So we're like, yeah, okay, us too, and then as we just, we had like a little like march around downtown, and that's when I truly got a sense of just the diversity of the crowd. There was all sorts of people there, all sorts of ethnic backgrounds, all sorts of signs. Some women were there more concerned trying to kind of spread the message of women's rights and women's single-sex spaces. So it was a really good experience. There was another one planned for October, unfortunately, but that was like kind of after the events of like Israel and all this. So things got a bit tricky. And so that kind of dwindled. I don't think anybody really went to the second march, which is unfortunate because the first one really felt like at least we're all here for this one single issue. We probably disagree on many things versus, the counter protesters, which there was like maybe 100, 200 of them, ideological lockstep, right? Same ideas, same kind of clothing, same uniform, same signs that said all the same things. And so it was better, in my opinion, to be on the side that at least agreed we should all protect kids and get along for this purpose. So all in all, like, I had a good experience.
Good. Yeah. Okay. Good to know. Good to have that perspective. Yeah. Because there's a lot of, and thanks for that, because yeah, a lot of what you see around, I mean, there's that map of Canada that with the rainbow that says no space for hate. Like, it's instantly, as you said, like lockstep, instantly it's like, just, it's hate. It's just, it's a message of hate. Right. And yeah, so it's really, yeah, it sounds like it was mostly positive.
Definitely. Yeah.
But of course you're gonna, like, that's the thing is like, yeah, of course you're gonna get the odd person who's like sending a shitty message, and that happens too. And you have to be able to like use your capacity for critical thought and nuance to like get past sort of the odd the odd radical and
Yeah.
like look to the like core of the message.
Well, it was such a broad coalition. They even had like, was it Arthur Piotowski? They started talking about COVID. They had a doctor there talking about fluoride in the water. It was a bit of a jumble, but
Yeah,
in the midst of all of that, we were there for that one purpose, to show up and to say we were against this. And I just thought that that was all in all positive. Yeah.
that's great. Um, okay. Okay, I wouldn't mind if you're cool with it, talking about the witch trial of Amy Hamm a bit.
Sure. Yeah.
Do you know Amy?
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
Yeah, we're friends. Yeah.
Oh, cool. Yeah. So Amy Hamm, for anyone who doesn't know, Amy Hamm is she a nurse midwife or a nurse?
A nurse.
Okay. She's a
Yeah.
nurse in British Columbia who is being reprimanded legally by her college
By her college.
for basically saying that men aren't women.
Basically, yeah. So this kind of came from two complaints. One from her involvement in the billboard, that like the erection of a billboard that said "I heart J.K. Rowling." That was like one complaint from the public, and there was another complaint that I believe was mostly just kind of her social media presence in general. Just kind of like, yeah, which she talks about the fact that men aren't women, kids shouldn't transition. She just speaks out against gender ideology, basically. Yeah.
Yeah. Have you been tuning in at all to the proceedings?
Yeah, I've watched as much as I can. I mean, so basically it started a year ago,
Yeah.
in October, so I watched most of that. This time around I watched everything but the last 2 days, but I've kind of caught up on what happened and stuff.
Yeah.
So I was able to see basically her entire testimony and all of that. Yeah. I would usually have it playing all day while I'm like walking my dog and working and stuff. So yeah, I was present for most of it.
I've been trying to I tried like in October to like be there and be checking in, but I wasn't able to follow. I didn't hear any of her testimony.
Wow, she did great.
Yeah. Like I guess I'm wondering like where they're at with it right now. Like what stage are they at and what is like going on?
So where they're at is they're done like calling witnesses and stuff. They're going to come back one more time in the new year for both sides, like the lawyers, to make their final submissions.
Okay.
Not super clear because I missed the last 2 days, but I thought they would make written submissions, but I think they're going to come back for just like one more meeting, maybe one day, maybe more, to just make those final arguments, and then it'll stop. And then I don't know how much longer it'll be till an actual decision by the panel. So this thing has been dragging out for over 3 years, like since she got the initial complaint, and then like over a year of just the proceedings. And so yeah, it's terrible.
It is terrible. And in the meantime, is she employed?
Yes,
Okay.
that's the messed up thing about all of this, is that this is kind of deciding, well, should she be a nurse or should she keep her license because maybe she's like a danger to patients, but she's been working the whole time. So if she was such a danger and a threat to patients, why is she working, right? So no, she's never had a patient complaint. These did not come from patients. These were, again, like members of the public, one known to her and one that's keeping their identity a secret out of like fear of retribution. Like she would do anything. Right. So yeah.
Wow. Yeah. And this will be interesting to see what happens here, because I guess if, I'm not sure exactly what, like, if they find her conduct reprehensible enough that she should be punished, or she should, what you said is that either she's going to have her license taken away or not. Is that kind of the be all and end all here?
That's the crux of it, is should she keep her license? Wow. I think ultimately it's going to come down to, yeah, should she keep it or not? So basically, should she keep her job or not?
Right. So if she's not able to keep her license over this is going to set a serious sort of precedent in Canada.
Yes.
That, if your thoughts or your personal opinions are not favorable to the majority, the ruling elite, the governing authorities, that then you should have your livelihood revoked.
Yeah, and they're kind of arguing that she has made these statements while identifying as a nurse, so therefore kind of trying to get her like, but the thing is, never once did she use her position as a nurse to say, therefore you should listen to me about these issues. Simply, it would be in her Twitter bio, because that's just a biographical fact about her, just like the fact that she's a mom. Or if she would write an article and at the bottom it might say, oh, Amy Hamm is a nurse in New Westminster, she's a mom of 2 boys. Like, she never once said, because I am a nurse, I'm right about, when it comes to children or this. So it's very disingenuous. They're kind of trying to say, because sure, I understand a regulated profession, maybe you're not allowed to say like, well, as a psychologist, I'm going to diagnose you with this. I get that, but that's not what she was doing. And so, she's got fantastic lawyers, like the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedom is representing her, and they're making just such a good case. Like, we're hoping the panel does the right thing, because this is about free expression. She was just expressing herself, and not even to just be a jerk on the internet. She was doing advocacy. She was putting on events. She was, her public commentary and writing is about advocacy, which is ridiculous, because one of the main lawyers arguing against her, Barbara Finley, I get that she's doing her job, she calls herself an activist lawyer. This lawyer uses her status as a lawyer to be an activist, to push forward self-ID legislation, to do all this stuff. And yet at issue is the fact that Amy happens to be a nurse while having unpopular opinions. So I have many strong feelings about this. It's just such a crazy.
It all boils down to who's right think versus wrong think, right? This is pretty serious. Like I mean, everything that's sort of happening is pointing to we have like major censorship going on that no one's really talking about. Like, even the Canada's laws now that you can't access like Canadian news content on your social media feed, or share news content on your social media feed. I mean, that in itself is a big enough deal that people should be basically, rallying in the streets about, but nobody is.
They should be.
And then this issue with we don't have, like, I don't know, it's kind of a gray area right in Canada. Like, we don't really have protected speech. I mean, in a way we do, but then of course it can be abrogated or derogated within reasonable grounds if they feel like they need to do that. So
I should think that we have free expression, which would cover that, but the way that they're just getting around it is because now all of our human rights codes, federally and provincially, have the protected characteristic of gender identity and gender expression. And so the argument now legally is like, well, if you speak out against those things, it's hate speech, and therefore we can curb your expression and it's correct. And so that's very murky area that we're getting into, and it should be very concerning for anybody.
It is very concerning, and I know professionals who argue for it and will say, well, if we don't have this, then if we don't have these hate speech laws in effect, and if the government essentially can't police our speech, then we'll turn into Nazi Germany, and we'll just be killing each other. And it's like, I think there's like evidence to the contrary, like quite a bit of evidence to the contrary. And I think that actually what's so interesting about it is the very same argument can actually be made for the opposite side. Like, you could actually say, well, no, the government controlling what people say and ultimately what people think and the content that they have access to, by shutting people down, by censoring people, in itself actually will lead us to fascism and an intolerant society that absolutely has no tolerance for like diversity of opinion.
Of course.
So this whole diversity thing is like, it's kind of backfiring, right?
Yeah. And that used to be like, I recently wrote a piece about the Canada's largest gay rights organization, EGAL. I wrote like a long piece about them, and then I wrote about their changing attitudes towards free speech. So back in like even the early 2000s, EGAL was actually going to bat for some pastor who was very homophobic. He was saying things about gay people, that we were depraved, we were this, we were that. And EGAL actually said, because there was like a human rights complaint filed against this pastor, and this gay rights organization was actually on his side. They said, we find his speech distasteful, but he's allowed to say it, and free speech was very important for us to get our rights, right? But then in like the late 2000s or early 2010s, that organization completely flipped the script. They now support all this like hate speech stuff, all that, right? So it used to be that marginalized people, like gay people, recognized because we have free expression, we were able to argue for ourselves and for our rights. That's how we got them. And then as soon as now we're in power, now any speaking out against us is hate speech, right? So it's a total flip, it's a total reversal. And like we used to know how important it was to be able to speak. That is a protection for minorities mostly, because people who have power will generally always be able to express themselves.
Yeah.
So it's the people who don't that need those protections, and to be arguing against it is you're just shooting yourself in the foot. Like,
And they need those protections so that people won't who have the power won't abuse it. And
yeah,
again, right? Yeah, yeah, it's really, really, really concerning.
hmm
Canada's like, and it's just, I just find it so, people here are so complacent, and
complacent. Yeah,
they can't make the link between, like, a lot of the times my sort of difficulty with, again, like, for lack of a better analogy, like the left leaning progressive claiming identifying people, is that they can make the links between power and privilege, but they can't make the link from power and privilege to sort of everything we see going on now. They can't make the link from,
yeah,
the big sort of power conglomerates to how that's expressing itself in these sort of mainstream, like whether it was the COVID debacle or the gender conversation. Like, they can't, like I said to someone a little while back, like, they said something about, like, in mainstream society. I said, gender ideology is mainstream society. Like, this,
it
that's
is. Yeah,
what it is now. Like, there is
yes,
there is no separation here, right?
no,
And I mean, not to get into too much of the, like, overarching global agendas, whatever, but yeah, I think it's like people really need to start looking at this with a much more critical lens. And because I think more, like, my perspective is that more people are getting harmed by this ideology than they're purporting to save. Um,
absolutely.
so actually it's really yeah, so it's really big problematic.
Yeah, and I think that that's an important point. Is I tried to drive home, and which I was telling to the premier, because she did kind of turn to us and ask why is this happening, right? And that's a big question. But the one thing I could say with what I knew with our dwindling time was that it isn't an isolated thing, gender ideology. It's not isolated at all. So sorry, my dog is barking. It's part of like a much broader, for lack of a better word, like woke, or like you said, the kind of globalization. It's connected to all of these other things in society. There's censorship and like eroding our free speech rights. You can't deal with it on its own, and that's sometimes my frustration with people in this fight, especially kind of the more gender critical radfem side, is they tend to try to isolate it, but still are on the kind of mainstream side of a lot of these other issues, with like discussions of oppression and hierarchy and power and privilege and all of that. I just feel like they think they can deal with it as this one thing and just get rid of the gender ideology and we'll be fine. But I know it's just one part of a much larger issue. It's the one part that I'm kind of most interested in and able to talk about and speak about and write about. So that's why I focus there. But yeah, I'm concerned about other things like COVID and everything. Like, I think that's just connected. It's the same kind of mindset of just like control and creeping totalitarianism, right? So you have to tackle it more broadly than just, men aren't women.
Yeah, yeah. And and more broadly, and like, and just, yeah, of course, the we don't maybe need to say it, but I'm going to say it, what happens, like, in the journey to give trans identifying people all their full spectrum of rights. What happens when we trample the rights of women and children, right? And that's what's happening. And so yeah, so we need to be able to have these conversations, and I so appreciate everything you're doing. In one of your articles called How to Know Who You Are, which is just it's kind of, I find it kind of like a tongue-in-cheek title, right? Because it's like, yeah, there's this really overarching sort of narrative in society right now where, like, whether it's the gender issue or the mental health, the realm of mental health, it's like, to really, like, find who you are. You need to find who you are, and who is this mysterious me, right?
Exactly.
That's like root, like, sort of nestled deep down inside, that I need to, like, dig out and really find. We need to find it. I think it's really, like, it's become like a really pervasive cultural theme that, like, is really, like, it benefits a lot of establishments and institutions. I think it's really like, so that again, another sort of like large looming element of our world right now, is this like the industrial complex of whether it's gender or mental health or whatever. But yeah, I really like the fact that you're like analyzing all these different parts of the culture and how they impact each other and how they connect and how they touch each other. Yeah, so thank you for all of that.
It's actually so funny that you like bring that piece up, because I loved it. I loved writing it, and but I didn't even share it on Twitter because I just thought, well, most people aren't going to care. Like, it's just this kind of little essay I was thinking, mulling over in my head, and people who subscribe can see it, but who else is going to care, right? They want my gender takes and all this, and that's why I put a little bit in there. But it's just kind of nice to hear that you read it and liked it, because there are obviously more things I'm interested in, and I do think that this is connected to broader societal trends, especially like this quest to find yourself, this like mystical quest, like it is this other person, someone you are not, right? And I wanted to give credence to the idea that to actually be who you are, it can take work. I've been finding that, like, as I've had to kind of confront and grow and be willing to speak out, like, it does take work to simply say your true opinions, right? But that doesn't mean that I had to like go on this quasi-mystical journey to like dig myself up and find this other person. And so, yeah, I do believe that that is contributing to sort of the trans kind of confusion, because they think some young girl can think who I really am is a boy, when it's like you just aren't that thing. You can never be that thing, right? So it's this mass kind of confusion. And so I do like to kind of comment on things like that as well. And hopefully one day, if this gender thing is, if we move on from it, which I think will take a while, yeah, there's still things I want to speak about the culture and about society. So yeah, just thank you very much for reading and being aware of those articles that I didn't think anybody cared about. So
Oh, I love it. I
really
love it.
cool.
And
Really cool to hear.
for me, that particular one too touched on all of that, because there are like, and to go to the broader agenda, like I think a lot of these things are sold to us, and it's highly profitable. And it's oftentimes the solution that they're providing this problem. Like the problem is that you don't know who you are and you have to find it.
Yeah.
And here's the solution. Well, it's surgery, it's drugs, it's
Yeah.
not all just gender stuff. It's, like women have been subjected to this for a long time. Like we've been,
Yes.
we have like surgery sold to us, we have drugs sold to us. I mean, most women,
Yeah.
I'm in my early 40s, and most women my age, like there's lots of women my age who are on drugs, because we're sold this idea that like we need to fix ourselves, and there's something wrong with us, right? And then we need to
Yeah.
find, and we need to be better, and we need to do better. And
Exactly.
and when we don't feel right, instead of listening to ourselves, we're told that there's something wrong.
Yeah.
When maybe there is something wrong, but maybe then we need to change that, right? Instead of just trying to cover it up with these surface.
Yeah, we're not going to solve the trans issue if we don't tackle that. Like, a big part kind of in gender critical circles is like, well, this is all just misogyny. And there's a great deal of that. There's a great deal of like, but that's not all it is. There is exactly what you just said just now, these messages that we get about all the different pills and everything we have to take. If we don't tackle that, then it's just going to continue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Oh, Eva, I'm just like so grateful, and thank you so much for all of your time and your energy here. I would like to plug you a bit, and I know that like you write, so Eva Kurilova, like
Yes.
you have a Substack,
Yes.
which is awesome. You also write for this awesome publication called The Dissent, which is also
Yep.
on Substack, but it's like it has its own thing. I've seen you write also for Reduxx.
Yes.
And is there anything else you'd like to plug about yourself?
Yeah, sure. I also write for Gender Dissent. It's just this little website we have. It's just kind of Canadian based. We follow like the money of like gender industry in Canada and like the politics and all that. Yeah, you basically covered it. I'm just here in Calgary, just working away, trying to do what I can on this issue, and making great friends along the way.
Awesome.
I really, really appreciate speaking to you. This was so much fun. Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate it too. Yeah, and okay, well, take care, and yeah, thanks again.
Cool. Thanks. Have a great day.
Okay, you too. Bye.